Marcus Bell was standing beside the dry irrigation pipe when the old brass watch on his wrist stopped at exactly 4:17 in the morning. He noticed it, because the silence was wrong. For 38 years, water had reached his farm before sunrise. Even during the hottest summers, when the fields turned brown and the air smelled like dust, the old pipe had always carried a steady stream from the creek beyond the northern fence. But that morning, there was nothing. Marcus turned the valve once, twice. Then he pulled harder. The pipe gave a hollow metal groan. Still nothing. He walked across the field toward the road. His boots sank into loose soil. The young corn stood in uneven rows, their leaves already curling from the heat. At the edge of the property, Marcus stopped. A new ditch crossed the road. Beside it stood a metal gate, and on the gate was a white sign, "Water access restricted." Marcus stared at it. Then he saw the smaller line beneath it, "Propertive of Red Creek Water District." He slowly removed his hat. There was no water district pipe on his land. There had never been one. The irrigation line had been installed by his father, Elijah Bell, when Marcus was a boy. Marcus remembered helping him carry sections of black pipe through the field. He remembered his father's hands covered in mud. He remembered the smell of hot metal. Most of all, he remembered one thing Elijah had always said: water remembers where it came from. Marcus had never understood what that meant. Now he wondered if his father had known something. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out Elijah's old black notebook. The notebook was small and worn. Marcus carried it almost every day. He opened it beside the locked gate. Inside were planting dates, rainfall numbers, repair notes, and small drawings of the farm. Near the back, Marcus found something he had never noticed before. A hand-drawn line ran beneath the field. Then another. Then another. They formed a rough map. Marcus frowned. At the bottom of the page, his father's handwriting appeared. "If they ever take the water, don't fight them above ground." Marcus read it again. Then he looked toward the field. The morning sun was beginning to rise. And somewhere beneath his 6 acres, something had been waiting for decades. By 8 o'clock, Marcus was sitting across from a clerk at the Red Creek Water District office. The clerk barely looked up. "Your water access was terminated." "By who?" "By the district." "Why?" The clerk slid a folder across the desk. Marcus opened it. A survey map, a property agreement, and a document dated 37 years earlier. His father's signature was at the bottom. Marcus stared at it. "That isn't his signature." The clerk finally looked up. "It says it is." Marcus closed the folder. "My father never sold our water rights." The clerk shrugged. "Then you'll need a lawyer." Marcus stood. Outside, the sun was already burning through the morning haze. He walked back to his truck and sat behind the wheel. For a long moment, he didn't start the engine. Then his hand moved to the old notebook sitting on the passenger seat. He opened it again. The map was still there. So was the sentence. "Don't fight them above ground." Marcus looked toward the distant fields. "If that's what you meant, Dad," he whispered, "show me where to dig." He started the truck and drove home. By noon, the first row of corn had begun to fold over. Marcus stood between the plants with a shovel in his hand. He had farmed this land for 22 years. He knew when a plant was thirsty. He knew when the soil was too cold. He knew which clouds carried rain and which ones only carried disappointment. That afternoon, the ground felt like brick. Marcus walked to the center of the field. He opened his father's notebook. The old map showed 3 lines beneath the property. One crossed the northern field, one curved toward the barn. The third disappeared beneath a large circle drawn in faded pencil. Marcus measured the distance with his boots. 27 steps from the fence. He pushed the shovel into the earth. Nothing. He tried again. The blade struck something. Clang. Marcus froze. He cleared the dirt with his hands. A thin metal pipe appeared beneath the soil. It was old. Very old. He followed it for several feet until it disappeared beneath a thick layer of packed earth. Marcus sat back on his heels. His father had never mentioned this pipe. He called his neighbor Samuel Carter. Samuel arrived 20 minutes later in an old pickup. He climbed out, looked at the hole, and said nothing. "You knew?" Samuel shook his head. "No." Marcus pointed at the pipe. "Then what is it?" Samuel crouched beside him. "I don't know." They dug until sunset. The pipe continued beneath the field. At one point, Marcus found a small brass plate attached to it. There were 3 letters stamped into the metal, BWC. Samuel rubbed the dirt away. Bell Water Channel, he said. Marcus looked at him. You're guessing? Yeah. Marcus smiled faintly. That's what Dad used to do. They kept digging. Then the shovel broke through a layer of loose soil. Cold air rushed from the hole. Marcus stopped breathing for a second. He leaned closer. From somewhere beneath them came a faint sound. Drip, drip, drip. Water. Not much, but enough. The 2 men looked at each other. Marcus lowered a flashlight into the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness. There was a hollow chamber underneath the field. Samuel stepped back. You need to call somebody. Marcus shook his head. Not yet. Marcus, my crops have 3 days. Samuel looked at the dry plants around them. Then he nodded. They widened the opening. By midnight, they had uncovered a narrow stone-lined tunnel. The stones were black with age. Marcus crawled inside. His flashlight shook slightly in his hand. The tunnel ran beneath the field. On the wall were faded marks, numbers, dates, names. Marcus wiped away the dirt. The first name was Elijah Bell. Below it was another, Thomas Bell, his grandfather. Marcus stopped. His grandfather had died before Marcus was born, yet here was his name beneath the farm. And below both names was a date. Marcus stared at it. What were they doing down here? Samuel's voice came from behind him. Maybe they weren't building it. Marcus turned. What do you mean? Samuel pointed toward the stones. Look at the walls. Marcus raised the flashlight. The stonework wasn't modern. It wasn't even close. Some sections looked decades older than the date written on the wall. Marcus slowly moved forward. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber. In the center stood an old wooden box. Marcus approached it. The wood was swollen and dark. He knelt. There was a small brass lock, and scratched into the lid were 4 words, "For the Bell family." Marcus touched the letters. His father's notebook suddenly felt heavy in his pocket. He pulled it out. The map had one final mark he had not understood, a small X, right beneath the chamber. Marcus looked down. Then he heard something behind the wall, a deep, distant rushing sound. Samuel whispered, "Marcus." The sound grew louder. Water was moving, but it wasn't coming from the direction of the creek. It was coming from underneath them. Marcus stepped toward the sound, and the ground moved beneath his boots. A section of the stone wall collapsed just after sunrise. Marcus jumped backward as dirt and rocks spilled across the tunnel floor. Cold water rushed through the opening, not a trickle, a stream. Clear, cold water poured through the broken stones and disappeared beneath the chamber. Samuel stared. Marcus didn't move. For years, Marcus had believed his farm depended on the creek, but the creek had never been the true source. The creek was only where his father had connected the old irrigation system. The real water was underneath them. Marcus crawled through the opening. The passage beyond was larger, much larger. The walls were lined with stone channels. At the far end, sunlight entered through a narrow crack. Marcus followed it. He climbed upward and pushed away a layer of soil. A few feet later, his head broke through the ground. He was standing near the northern edge of his property. There was no creek there, only dry grass, but beneath the grass was a covered stone reservoir. Marcus brushed away the dirt. The lid had collapsed years ago. Inside was water, hundreds of gallons, maybe thousands. Samuel stood beside him. Why would your father hide this? Marcus looked back toward the tunnel. I don't think he hid it. Then why didn't he tell you? Marcus had no answer. They returned to the chamber. The wooden box remained untouched. Marcus took a small pry bar from his truck. The brass lock snapped. Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth. The first document was dated 1962. The second was from 1978. The third carried his father's name. Marcus unfolded it. His eyes moved slowly across the page. It wasn't a sale agreement. It was a warning. The original water system beneath the Bell property had been connected to an underground spring that served several farms. The landowners had maintained it together for generations, but in 1989, a private company had tried to purchase the surrounding land. Marcus remembered that year. He had been a child. His father had started working longer hours. Some neighbors had left, others had sold. Elijah had refused. The final page explained why. The company wanted control of the underground water. Marcus's fingers tightened around the paper. At the bottom was his father's handwriting. If they control the surface, protect what is beneath it. Marcus sat silently. Samuel looked at him. Your father knew this would happen. Marcus shook his head. No. He looked at the date. His father's warning had been written only 6 months before Elijah died. He knew it might happen. That difference mattered. Marcus folded the papers. Then he heard an engine outside. A black SUV stopped beside the field. 2 people stepped out. One was the district engineer. The other was a woman Marcus recognized from the water office. She walked toward the barn. Mr. Bell, she called. Marcus stepped outside. You're trespassing. We received a report of unauthorized digging. Marcus looked toward the tunnel entrance. It's my property. Not if you're disturbing protected infrastructure. Marcus smiled without humor. Protected by who? The woman didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the field. Her eyes stopped on the exposed stone opening. For a second, her face changed. Not fear, recognition. Marcus noticed. You knew. She looked away. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus stepped closer. My father built nothing down there. The woman remained silent. Marcus held up the old document. My family has been maintaining that water system since before your district existed. The engineer took a step forward. You need to stop digging. Why? Because you don't know what's down there. Marcus looked at the dark tunnel behind him, then back at the man. I think I finally do. The SUV left 20 minutes later. Marcus watched it disappear down the road. Then Samuel asked the question Marcus had been avoiding. What happens if they come back? Marcus looked at the field. The corn was still dying. The reservoir was full, but the legal documents gave the district enough room to claim the underground channel belonged to them. Marcus had water. He just couldn't legally reach it. And that was when he realized the biggest problem wasn't the drought. It wasn't the locked gate. It wasn't even the district. It was the clock. If he couldn't prove the water belonged to his farm before the crops died, none of it would matter. Marcus spent the next 2 days in the county records office. He sat beneath fluorescent lights while rain clouds gathered outside but never opened. He searched old property maps, water permits, land transfers, survey records. Everything ended in the same place, a missing document. 1 page had been removed from an old county file. Marcus stared at the empty space. The clerk said, "That's all we have." Marcus closed the folder. No, the clerk looked up. My father always kept copies. He returned home before dark. The farmhouse was quiet. Marcus walked into his father's old workshop. Dust covered the workbench. An old hammer rested beside a broken radio. He opened drawers, one by one. Nothing. Then he noticed the wall. A small nail held an old photograph. Elijah stood in front of the farmhouse. Marcus was 8 years old. His father's hand rested on his shoulder. Marcus removed the photograph. Behind it was a shallow hole in the wall. Inside was a folded envelope. Marcus opened it. The missing county document was there. So was a letter. Marcus sat on the floor. The letter was addressed to him. His father's handwriting was uneven. Marcus read slowly. Elijah explained that the underground spring had been known by local farmers for generations. He explained that several families had shared the water, and he explained the reason he had never shown Marcus the entire system. He had been afraid. Not of losing the farm, of making Marcus spend his whole life defending it. The final line stopped Marcus. I wanted you to build a life here because you loved the land, not because you were trapped protecting it. Marcus lowered the letter. For several seconds, he couldn't move. Then he laughed softly. His father had spent years teaching him how to fix pumps, read soil, and grow food, but he had never taught him how to fight. Maybe because he had hoped Marcus would never have to. Marcus stood. The next morning, he took the documents to a local attorney. The attorney read everything, then looked at Marcus. You have a strong case. Marcus waited. But the district can still challenge the historical claim. How long? Months. Marcus looked through the office window. Outside, the sky was white with heat. My crops don't have months. The attorney said nothing. Marcus left. That afternoon, he returned to the field. The corn was almost gone. He walked between the rows. Some stalks had fallen completely. He stopped beside one plant and touched a dry leaf. His father's brass watch hung from his wrist, still stuck at 4:17. Marcus had considered fixing it. He hadn't. It reminded him of the morning everything changed. He walked toward the tunnel. Then he saw something he had missed. Near the old reservoir was a second stone channel. It led away from the farm. Marcus followed it. The passage ended beneath the neighboring property, Samuel's property. Then beyond it, another channel continued toward 3 abandoned farms. Marcus suddenly understood. This wasn't just his water. It was an old shared system. The district had not simply cut off Marcus. They had cut off everyone. Marcus called Samuel, then 2 other former landowners. By sunset, 4 families stood around the old reservoir. Marcus placed his father's documents on a wooden crate. Nobody spoke for a while. Finally, an elderly woman named Ruth pointed at the map. "My grandfather told me about this." Marcus looked at her. "What did he say?" "He said the water belonged to whoever took care of it." Marcus looked at the others. One by one, they remembered. Old wells, stone channels, farmers repairing pipes together. A system that had existed before the district. The next morning, they opened the reservoir. Water moved through the channels, slowly, then faster. The first stream reached Marcus's field by noon. He stood beside the irrigation ditch as water touched the dry soil. The ground darkened. The smell of wet earth rose into the hot air. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he heard something besides silence, water, but the district saw it too. By evening, a notice arrived. Court order. Stop all water access. Marcus read it under the porch light, then folded the paper. Samuel asked, "What are we going to do?" Marcus looked at the dark field. "I don't know." He reached for his father's notebook, and inside it, beneath the old map, he found one final page. He had never seen it before. Only 3 words were written there. "Ask the town." Marcus stared at them. Then he understood. His father hadn't left him a secret. He had left him a way forward. The town meeting began at 7. By 7:30, every chair was filled. Farmers stood along the walls. Old residents sat near the windows. People who had never spoken to Marcus before now knew his name. Marcus stood at the front with the old notebook in his hand. He didn't give a speech. He simply placed the documents on the table. One by one, the old farmers came forward. They brought photographs, letters, property records, hand-drawn maps, memories, pieces of the same forgotten system. The district attorney argued that the water channel belonged to the modern authority. Then Ruth stood. She placed an old photograph on the table. It showed 6 farmers standing beside the reservoir in 1951. On the back was a sentence: shared water, shared responsibility. The room went quiet. The district engineer looked at the photograph. Marcus watched his face. For the first time, the engineer looked uncertain, not defeated, just uncertain. The county judge asked for additional records. The hearing lasted 3 hours. At the end, the judge issued a temporary order. The families could continue using the historic water system while ownership was reviewed. It wasn't a perfect victory. The district could still challenge the case. The farm was still damaged. Most of Marcus's corn was gone, but water was flowing again. The next morning, Marcus walked into the field alone. The sun rose behind the trees. Mist hovered low over the irrigation ditch. He crouched beside the first surviving row. A tiny green leaf had pushed itself upward through the wet soil. Marcus touched it with one finger. Then he smiled. His father's notebook was still in his pocket. He opened it to the first page. The old map looked different now, not because the lines had changed, because Marcus finally understood them. The water had never been a secret buried beneath the farm. The secret was the memory of the people who had protected it. Marcus walked toward the farmhouse. He stopped at the porch. The old brass watch was still on his wrist, 4:17. He removed it. For years, he had thought the broken watch represented the moment everything had stopped. The morning the water disappeared. The morning the farm seemed lost. But now Marcus understood something else. That watch had stopped at the beginning of the fight, not the end. He carried it inside. For the first time, he opened his father's notebook to the empty pages at the back. He took a pen, and underneath Elijah's old words, he wrote his own. The water came back. Then he paused, crossed out the sentence, and wrote, "We found it because we looked beneath what everyone else could see." Years later, people in the town would still talk about the dry summer when the Bell farm almost disappeared. They would remember the locked gate, the court order, the old tunnel, the reservoir beneath the field. But Marcus remembered something smaller. He remembered the first drop of water touching his father's soil. He remembered the sound, soft, almost nothing, yet after days of silence, it sounded like an answer. The farm did not become perfect. Some crops never recovered. Some debts took years to repay. The legal fight continued long after the first harvest returned, but the families rebuilt the old water system together. They repaired the stone channels, they marked the underground paths, they created a shared agreement so no single office could quietly close the water again. Marcus kept farming, and every spring, before planting, he walked the northern field alone. Sometimes he stopped beside the reservoir, sometimes he opened the old notebook. Sometimes he simply stood there and listened. One evening, years after the first gate appeared, Marcus brought his own son to the field. The boy carried the old notebook. Marcus carried the brass watch. "Why did Grandpa hide all this?" the boy asked. Marcus looked toward the water. He wasn't hiding it. Then what was he doing? Marcus smiled. He was waiting for the right person to understand it. His son looked down at the notebook. Marcus handed him the watch. The boy turned it over. "Does it work?" Marcus shook his head. "No. Why don't you fix it?" Marcus looked across the field. "Because some things are worth keeping the way they are." The boy didn't understand. Not yet. They walked together toward the house. Behind them, water moved quietly through the irrigation channel. The same sound Marcus had heard beneath the ground years before. The sound that had started as a mystery, then a warning, then a fight, and finally a reminder. Sometimes what people try to take from you isn't only land, money, or water. Sometimes they are trying to make you forget what was yours to protect. And sometimes the answer isn't standing above you. Sometimes you have to dig deeper, look closer, and remember what the people before you were trying to leave behind. Marcus glanced back once. The sun was falling over the field. The young crops moved gently in the evening wind. And beneath them, unseen by anyone passing on the road, the old water kept moving, quietly, patiently, still there,